Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. A new report is painting a dramatic and detailed picture of Russian attempts to influence the 2016 election, revealing that last year the CIA learned that Vladimir Putin himself was directly involved in the cyber campaign to influence the U.S. election. The report is in the Washington Post. It calls Russia's efforts to influence the election politically the crime of the century. But keeping them honest, neither today's dramatic story nor the actual Russian hacking nor the ongoing threat to future U.S. elections seem to be raising much concern within the White House, or even much curiosity. It's sort of like if Paul Revere rode through the night to warn that the British were coming, but his warnings were met with silence. In a moment, you'll hear from one of the reporters who broke the Washington Post story. Not only does it reveal intelligence sourced from deep within the Kremlin that outlined Vladimir Putin's direct involvement, according to the CIA, into the cyber campaign, but it goes on to reveal a level of concern so grave over the following months that then President Obama approved planting the digital equivalent of explosives inside sensitive Russian computer systems to be set off in the future if the cyber battle escalated. The story also lays out how the Obama administration ultimately did far less than many believed was warranted, ironically out of fear of being seen as trying to influence the election's outcome, and perhaps because they thought Hillary Clinton was going to win the election despite the hacking. What the story does not do is reveal anything that the American public has not already known, at least in broad strokes, for almost a year now, namely that Russia meddled in the election. Russia continues to meddle in other countries' elections, Great Britain, France, just to name two. And according to recent testimony from past and current top intelligence officials, analysts, and lawmakers in a position to know, Moscow has its eye on doing it again. Plenty of very smart people in both parties considered what Russia did and continues to do to be a threat to Western democracy. Some even called it an act of war. Yet the White House and the president continue to be blasé about it. Here's senior advisor Kellyanne Conway this morning on CNN's New Day. When asked about the Post report about hacking, she answers instead about something else.
What's the White House's response to this?
Well, the president has said previously, and we've got confirmation now from Jay Johnson, from Adam Schiff, from Dan Coates, from Jim Comey, from Mike Rogers, that there's no evidence of collusion, number one, and number two, that this didn't have an impact on the electoral result. We know that Donald Trump won fairly and squarely 306 electoral votes. Yes, it had nothing to do with interference.
We know that as well. But what about this new reporting that there are 36 high-level officials that say that they can connect President Putin with giving instructions to hack the DNC computers and to plant fake stories? What is the current White House doing about this?
Well, Allison, the president has said previously, and he stands by that, particularly as president-elect, that he would be concerned about anybody interfering in our democracy. We saw a lot of people interfering with our democracy by saying he couldn't win here at home.
I mean, against Russia, what is he doing specifically to try to stop this?
Allison, I realize that we just like to say the word Russia, Russia to mislead the voters, and I know that CNN is aiding and abetting this nonsense as well, but you've asked him the same question 3 times now, and I'm answering it.
And you're not answering it, Kellyanne.
Yes, I am. He's the president of the United States.
And what's he doing?
He has said very clearly that he wants the voter integrity and the ballot integrity to be protected.
And what
because
action
against
is he
any
taking?
type of interference at this very moment, at this very second?
Yes.
Oh, yes, because we have nothing to say about Russian collusion or affecting the electoral outcome.
Kellyanne,
those rabbit holes did not bear fruit.
So, if you were following that, she can't or won't name one thing that the president is actually doing to prevent future Russian efforts to disrupt elections. Now, late today, Press Secretary Sean Spicer was asked about Russian hacking. We would show you the actual video, but again today, no cameras were allowed. So we did what we actually do in courtrooms when cameras aren't allowed. That's right, we sent a sketch artist named Bill Hennessy to the White House to draw some pictures.
Is he concerned about that?
Yeah, of course. He's concerned about any country or any actor that wants to interfere in elections.
It's a good drawing. So Sean Spicer, again, not able or willing to single out actually Russia. And Kellyanne Conway, when asked, changed the subject to collusion with Russia, which the administration says the president has been cleared on, or to the president's victory, which is, of course, undisputed. He won. In any case, avoiding the central question is nothing new. Back in July, when reports of Russian hacking began emerging, then candidate Trump treated it as kind of a joke.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
Well, by September, candidate Trump was playing sort of coy.
I mean, it could be Russia, but it could also be China. It could also be lots of other people. It also could be somebody sitting on their bed that weighs 400 pounds, okay? You don't know who broke in to DNC.
On October 7th, the Department of Homeland Security and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence issued a joint statement warning that Russia was behind the hacking. Just 3 days later, candidate Trump was focused not on the hacking, but what the hackers got, information that was published by WikiLeaks.
Now, this just came out. WikiLeaks. I love WikiLeaks.
Well, that was October 10th, 3 days after the U.S. intelligence community put out its statement. Now, look, in fairness, things get said in the heat of a campaign. That's understood. It's water under the bridge. But the election is over. Donald Trump is president completely legitimately. So the question is, what is actually being done by the White House? Well, Kellyanne Conway didn't point this out, but she could have pointed out that the president has signed an executive order on cybersecurity that calls federal agencies to submit risk assessment reports within 90 days and gives the military a larger share of responsibility for federal cybersecurity. Oddly, it does not specifically mention Russia or Russian hacking. Beyond that, though, from the president, we haven't seen much action or heard much real concern. And although we're not privy, obviously, to conversations the president has had with his top intelligence and law enforcement officials, we do know from some of their testimony, from reports of their testimony, that he's very interested in the Russian investigation, mainly as it relates to clearing him or his associates. The common thread seems to be a lack of interest in the actual threat.
Did you have any interactions with the president that suggested he was taking that hostile action seriously?
I don't remember any interactions with the president other than the initial briefing on January the 6th. I don't remember, could be wrong, but I don't remember any conversations with him at all about that.
You never asked for a briefing or attended a briefing or read the intelligence reports?
You might have been very critical of me if I, as an active part of the campaign, was seeking intelligence relating to something that might be relevant to the campaign. I'm not sure that
I'm not talking about the campaign. I'm talking about what the Russians did. You received no briefing on the Russian active measures in connection with the 2016 election.
No, I don't believe I ever did.
Well, a bit later in the broadcast, we're going to hear from a Republican member of the House Intelligence Committee and get his take on how seriously he thinks the president takes the problem. Right now, Senator Sarah Murray joins us now from the North Lawn. I understand the White House formally responded tonight to the House Intelligence Committee's request asking for any evidence of recordings of conversations with former FBI Director James Comey. What have you learned?
That's right. They did respond, but in an unusual fashion. And the response came from one of the president's legislative affairs staffers, his top legislative affairs staffer, not from the president's attorney, White House counsel. And it refers back to what in this letter to the committee it calls a statement, but is actually the president's tweet saying, with all of the recently reported electronic surveillance, intercepts, unmasking, and illegal leaking of information, I have no idea whether there are tapes or recordings of my conversations with James Comey, but I did not make and do not have any such recordings. It does not go any further than that. It is a very short 2-paragraph letter, but one thing, Anderson, it does answer is the question of whether the president's tweets are really statements. This seems to clear that issue up.
Press Secretary Sean Spicer had the briefing today. Again, no cameras allowed. We have the artist rendering. Any real news out of there?
There was a briefing. You can see the sketches that we have in place of the live television images that we would normally have in a White House briefing. He did point out the fact that he believes that President Trump is standing by his January comment that the Russians were the ones to meddle in the election. We actually haven't heard that from the president directly since January, so take that for what it's worth. And Spicer defended these off-camera briefings, saying it's a way to sort of have substantive policy discussions. For what it's worth, being in those briefings, that does not seem to be the case. There does not seem to be a difference in terms of the substance of those policy discussions, whether they are off camera or on camera. But this is clearly the tack the administration is taking right now, Anderson. All
right, Sarah Murray, sir, thanks very much. Now, much more on the Washington Post story. Adam Entis is one of the 3 reporters sharing the byline on it. I spoke with him just before we went to air. In the article, you describe Russian interference in the U.S. election as politically the greatest crime of the century.
Right. I mean, when you consider, what occurred in 2016, it is truly remarkable. I mean, spy services around the world are constantly stealing each other's secrets. I mean, that's what they do. That's their job to a great extent, in addition to analyzing it. But typically, this is done to try to benefit policymakers so they can have insights when they deal with that other country. What happened in this case is that the Russians, according to U.S. intelligence agencies, not only were doing what they always do, which is basically snooping around in the computer systems of all political parties, but in this case, they made a decision to basically take emails that they knew would be harmful to one side and inject them into the public through WikiLeaks in this case, in order to try to shape the outcome of an election.
And Jay Johnson, Obama's former Homeland Security Secretary, mentioned this in his testimony yesterday, but you also report that it was Vladimir Putin himself who, in fact, signed off on these attacks, and they have evidence of that.
Right. I mean, I think that was really the most remarkable, dramatic moment, if you will, that we discovered, which was basically the CIA in either late July or very early in August gets very sensitive intelligence from a very reliable source of information. It's very rare for the CIA, despite a popular perception that they have information on everything. It's very hard for them to get Putin himself, him providing an instruction. That is as close to a bombshell internal coup, if you will, for an intelligence service and for the CIA as ever. So for the CIA itself to get this from such a reliable source of information was a turning point for the administration as it was trying to decide how to respond.
It also, I mean, that fact that they know Vladimir Putin authorized this, was in on it, it makes the lack of comments by President Trump about this and the doubts that he has raised about Russian involvement even more stunning.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, one should consider the fact that the CIA does make mistakes. Sure. I mean, look what happened in Iraq. So it's good to be skeptical, and even Obama, had a measure of skepticism. He didn't just run with what Brennan presented to him, the former CIA director. He instructed the other intelligence chiefs to go out there and to confirm what the CIA had shown him in early August. So the same information that was presented to Obama was then presented in early January to Trump. Initially, he sounded like he was receptive, that maybe he was convinced based on what he was told in that early January meeting. But since then, you can see through his social media commentary and through his public statements that his skepticism is back. It seems to be back.
But you can't read your reporting on this and not be alarmed at the extent of Russia's intervention, the high-level support for it within Russia itself, and seemingly the lack of interest by the current president in that Russian intervention. Obviously, there's a lot of issues. He's arguing that there was no collusion. He feels that he's being unfairly tarred with that. But just the very fact of the intervention, you have both Jeff Sessions and former Director Comey testifying that they haven't really had any conversations with the president other than an initial briefing with Comey about Russia's interference. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of curiosity or alarm in this White House.
Right. I mean, in some ways, that may be the most disturbing part of all this. I mean, obviously, something very important happened in 2016, and there can be disputes about, what the intentions of the Russians might be, or there might be some disputes over, whether or not this casts a cloud over Trump or not. And, obviously, the FBI is investigating some of these issues. But really, the issue is the United States government taking this seriously and prepared to do something to make sure that it doesn't happen again? And as far as I can tell, there really is no effort, as far that I can see, certainly coming from the White House, which, like you said, is not necessarily taking this seriously, or even for that matter from Congress, where divisions are so deep. It's just not clear if these divided leaders in Congress and in the executive branch are prepared to compromise to try to address these issues ahead of the next election.
One former senior Obama administration official who was involved in the deliberations on Russia was quoted in your piece saying, "It is the hardest thing about my entire time in government to defend. I feel like we sort of choked." Was that the general feeling among people in the Obama administration that you spoke with?
Well, I think that is certainly a sentiment that we heard from many officials that we spoke to.
And part of that was, I'm sorry, but part of it just that they thought Hillary Clinton was going to win and that they could deal with this once in a Clinton administration?
I think that might have been part of it. Certainly there's a certain amount of heartbreak for some of these people, and some of them were counting on getting jobs in a Clinton administration, and now find themselves kind of in the political wilderness. But I think in this case, what we're dealing with is somebody who I know was personally felt like more should and could have been done. It's really a reflection, I think, of frustration. But I think at the top, at the highest levels of the government, the president and the top advisors who got to see all of the intelligence and had to weigh the pros and cons, this was very complicated. It wasn't black and white, and it cannot really be oversimplified. These were tough choices that people were making.
It's incredible reporting. I encourage everybody to read it. Adam Antis, thanks so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Support for Anderson Cooper 360 comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Chances are you're confident when it comes to your work, your hobbies, and your life. Rocket Mortgage gives you that same level of confidence when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. With Rocket Mortgage, you can apply simply and understand fully, so you can mortgage confidently. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/AC360. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states, NMLSconsumeraccess.org number 3030.
Tonight, the Washington Post is reporting that President Trump starts each day now with a ritual morning phone call. It's not with a key West Wing staffer or relative. It's with a member of his outside legal counsel to hash out the latest in the Russia investigation. According to the Washington Post reporting, which includes interviews with 22 senior administration officials, outside advisors, and Trump confidants, the president's team is encouraging the call to try to get the topic out of the president's system before the rest of his day begins so he can compartmentalize it. To varying degrees of success, apparently. Joining me now are three men who've spent some time getting in the president's head, all writing books about civilian Donald Trump. Tim O'Brien is the author of Trump Nation, The Art of Being Donald, and executive editor of Bloomberg View. Michael D'Antonio is a CNN contributor and author of The Truth About Trump. And Brad Thomas is author of The Trump Factor. He's also a Trump supporter. Michael, I mean, it was really interesting this morning, this vent session with the president's attorneys. The idea is to do, I guess, what Bill Clinton was able to do, according to the folks who worked in the Clinton White House, which was compartmentalize the investigations President Clinton was under. Do you think it works with Donald Trump?
I really don't think it does work. I'm sort of reminded of when I was a rambunctious little kid and my mother would send me out to play to burn off some of the energy. And then within an hour of coming back inside, I'd be bouncing off the walls again. And I think President Trump is very much like a kid with attention deficit disorder who is easily distracted in one moment. So a phone call with the lawyers or a meeting with attorneys might help briefly. But if he's given a pause, I think his resentment about an issue like this, his anger, his obsession, it's going to come back. And I think that's why we see later in the day he may still tweet about it. And he's obsessing about this being fake, something that the Democrats or the press have trumped up. And it's why he can't move on to actually helping the country deal with this threat of Russia rather than just talking about how the threat doesn't really exist.
Tim, I mean, over the years, you've certainly been a source of the president's anger. You were sued by him. Is it something that he can expend? I mean, that sort of get it out of his head and move on from?
No, because I think he's very afraid of the Russian investigation. The core issue here is that this has morphed, I think, from simply being an obstruction of justice investigation or a collusion investigation. I have serious doubt he cares about the collusion piece of it, into a financial investigation. And I think he's been concerned about that from the beginning. And I think that's why he's been so aggressive in trying to derail it and has put it so front of mind all the time in his administration, because it's going to come back to the money trail. And that is going to lead to his wallet, his business operations, and you're talking about someone who, over the course of his business career, doesn't have a closet full of skeletons. He has a warehouse full of them.
Your feed is breaking up. Brad, you knew the president as a businessman. You reported on him. Would certain issues consume him back then? How do you see his his ability to compartmentalize?
Sure. Well, the first thing, the obsession with Donald Trump is his work ethic. I mean, Donald Trump works harder than any other president we've seen in the White House in a long, long time. So he does get up early in the morning. Absolutely, that's correct. But Donald Trump knows how to focus. He knows.
When you say he works harder than any president, how do you know that?
Because we know he gets up early in the morning. We know he gets up late at night.
And he watches a lot of TV.
And I've seen him on the campaign trail. I campaigned with him for over a year. Went to rally after rally with him, and I've seen that work ethic. Believe me, it's there, absolutely. And so, so as far as the focus, Donald Trump understands what a circle of competence means. That's how he built a multi-billion-dollar portfolio, because he knows how to take one project at a time, health care, corporate tax, those initiatives, focus on those issues, and he is not distracted, and he is not scared of anything. Donald Trump is not scared of Russia.
Wait, I got to jump in, because you're describing a guy who's laser focused on a particular issue until it's done. His tweets, though, seem to indicate the exact opposite, no? I mean, he seems, whether it's Infrastructure Week that begins with him tweeting about everything other than infrastructure.
Sure. Well, his tweeting, and we know what his tweeting is all about. I mean, he is directing his messaging to his core audience, to his 35 million or so voters who voted for him. That's where what the Twitter comes involved. He's directing that message to his people. He attended a rally this week. He was that same message going out to those people at the rally. So he's focusing on these issues. He's communicating effectively with his audience. Twitter is one of those methods that he uses for that communication, obviously.
So you think that his tweets are not him venting or him in anger just grabbing a machine and at 6 a.m. and late at night. You're saying, you seem to be indicating that it's a very well thought out sort of orchestrated plan that's nothing but good for him, yes?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I think that's worked effectively, and that's why he's in the White House.
Michael, it certainly worked on the campaign trail. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who would argue the exact opposite of, a lot of these things, we have a special counsel now because of a tweet that the president originally sent out that then motivated Comey to leak something. Is that how you see his work ethic?
No, I don't. I mean, I've seen no evidence prior to the presidential campaign that he was especially hardworking at all. We now know that he gets very tired. When he was in Italy with the European leaders, he was the one in the golf cart following everyone behind while they were walking. So this is a person who may have good stamina for someone his age. He doesn't exercise. He eats poorly. The tweeting, to me, is evidence of a mind that is not very well focused. And when you listen to him talk, he can't stay focused on a topic long enough to make one coherent sentence, let alone a paragraph. So that's why he's always contradicting himself. He'll say, we have an answer in 2 weeks, and then a month goes by. I don't have confidence that he's focused at all.
All right, Tim O'Brien, I apologize we've lost the Skype on you. Michael D'Antonio, appreciate it. Brett Thomas as well.
Hi, everyone. This is Michaela Pereira. I am hosting a brand new podcast called CNN's The Rewind 90s Edition. It starts on July 6th, and together we'll journey back to the era of VHS movie nights to discover how the 90s still leaves its mark on us today. Find out more at cnn.com/the90s.
We've been reporting on the violence on the eve of perhaps a key congressional special election. The alleged body slamming of a reporter for The Guardian, Ben Jacobs, by the Montana Republican House candidate Greg Gianforte. Here is audio of the alleged assault.
Into the CBO score, because you were waiting to make your decision about health care until you saw the bill and it just came out. And what you thought
we'll talk to you about that later.
Yeah, but there's not going to be time. I'm just curious if you have the action
speak
right
with
now.
Shane, please.
But you don't.
Sick and tired of you guys. The last guy that came in here, you did the same thing. Get the hell out of here. Get the hell out of here. The last guy did the same thing. You were The Guardian?
Yes, and you just broke my glasses.
The last guy did the same damn thing.
You just body slammed me and broke my glasses.
Get the hell out of here.
If you'd like me to get the hell out of here, I'd also like to call the police. Can I get you guys' names?
Hey, you gotta leave.
He just body slammed me.
You gotta leave.
Well, just moments ago, the candidate spokesman issued a statement. It reads, quote, tonight, as Greg was giving a separate interview in a private office, The Guardian's Ben Jacobs entered the office without permission, aggressively shoved a recorder in Greg's face, and began asking badgering questions. Jacobs was asked to leave. The statement continues, after asking Jacobs to lower the recorder, Jacobs declined. Greg then attempted to grab the phone that was pushed in his face. Jacobs grabbed Greg's wrist and spun away from Greg, pushing them both to the ground. The statement concludes, "It's unfortunate that this aggressive behavior from a liberal journalist created this scene at our campaign volunteer barbecue." The question Ben Jacobs was asking when things turned south, I guess, or sour, was on today's Congressional Budget Office score of the House Republican health care bill, the CBO. You heard the CBO's scoring of it, and the White House slamming that scoring. These are the costs and the impact estimates the Republicans did not wait for before passing a revised GOP bill to repeal and replace Obamacare. Here's the upshot of it. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, says the number of uninsured people would increase by 23 million by 2026, compared to 24 million under the original GOP bill. The CBO also found the bill that the House passed would save less money, reducing deficits by $119 billion over 10 years versus $150 billion under the original bill. The White House just released a statement saying history has proven the CBO to be totally incapable of accurately predicting how health care legislation will impact health insurance coverage. The Senate is now, as you know, rewriting the House bill. The question is, how will these numbers factor in, if at all? Joining me now is Robert Reich, former Labor Secretary and author of Saving Capitalism for the Many, Not the Few. Also, CNN senior economics analyst Stephen Moore, a former senior economic advisor to the Trump campaign. I can guarantee there will be no body slamming during this interview. Secretary Reich, this new CBO score, how much does it actually move the needle here, do you think?
I think it does move the needle, in fact, quite a bit, because remember that 24 million people losing health insurance, that first CBO estimate having to do with that first time that the House tried to put its version of a repeal of Affordable Care Act, that was enough to basically scuttle that version altogether. It didn't even go to a vote. And the House then came up with its second version without hearing from the Congressional Budget Office. Now the Senate hears from the Congressional Budget Office. Instead of it being 24 million people losing their health insurance, it's 23 million. This is not a big improvement. This puts the Senate in a very, very difficult position. Senate Republicans are going to be scrambling. Either they're going to have to repudiate their own Congressional Budget Office, whose director is appointed by Republicans, by the way, or they're going to have to say it's coming apart anyway, the Affordable Care Act, and so if 23 million people lose their health insurance, big deal. That's a very untenable position. And I tell you, most of those losses are in Medicaid, and it's going to be even worse because of the Trump budget that even cuts Medicaid further.
Republicans are, as you said, criticizing the CBO, as you just heard that White House statement. Steve, I mean, you have fewer people, 23 million, who are going to be uninsured than were under Obamacare. You also have a smaller impact on the deficit. Is this a mixed bag for House Republicans?
Well, with all due respect, I think you and Robert Reich are bearing the lead story here on health care. I mean, there's actually a much bigger story than the Congressional Budget Office report, I understand, and that is that in recent hours, Blue Cross and Blue Shield, one of our biggest health insurance companies, has basically said that they're pulling out of Kansas, Missouri. This is, I think we can now officially declare Obamacare in the intensive care unit. I mean, you've now got one of the biggest insurance companies in the country, Anderson, that's basically saying we're out of Obamacare in several states. Now you've got more and more areas of the country, Robert Reich, that have no insurance company at all. And I predict if we were to stay in Obamacare, you wouldn't have 23 million people losing their health insurance. You'd have tens and tens of millions of people losing it.
But is that really a fair?
Steve,
go ahead. Secretary Reich.
Well, I just want to say, Steve knows as well as I do, and you do, Anderson, and everybody else, that the Trump administration has done everything they possibly can to undermine the Affordable Care Act. Steve, wait a minute, before you laugh, let me explain, because the insurance companies wanted some sureness. They wanted some certainty about what was going to happen. The Trump administration has not only failed to give them information, it's been telling the federal courts to hold off on any decision as to whether the insurance is going to be available. They've been hinting that they're not going to fund the insurance. So obviously insurance companies are going to start pulling out because the Trump administration is so intent on subverting this.
I knew you were going to say that, and the truth is, I looked at the numbers. These are the reason that Blue Cross and Blue Shield is pulling out of the market is because of $100 million of losses they had in the last 2 years, not because of what's happening now, Bob. I mean, you can blame a lot of things on Donald Trump,
Steve,
but you can't blame the collapse of Obamacare on Donald Trump. I mean, that's just
I understand your focus, and you've talked about it on the CBO score, though. I mean, I know Republicans attack the CBO, clearly don't want to discuss the CBO.
Right.
How damaging is this? Because if the idea is to have people covered and have people covered well, it doesn't seem to work on either of those scores.
So in answer to that question, Anderson, I think what it means is the Senate is going to have to rewrite the House bill. And that's something that the senators have been saying really from almost the day that the House finished its bill. It's been thrown over to the Senate. As you know, there's only 52 Republicans in the Senate, so they're going to have something they can all agree on. And I think the final bill is going to look a lot more like a bill that covers a lot more people than this. But look, the main point I'm making is what people are saying is all these people are going to lose their health insurance under the Republican plan. Everybody's going to lose their health insurance under Obamacare unless Bob, we throw them all into Medicaid.
But that's a little bit of a specious argument. That's a little bit of a specious argument.
A little bit of a specious argument. That is a total specious argument.
Go ahead, Secretary Rice.
Well, because the Affordable Care Act, what's going to happen in the Senate in order to get the votes they need, and also to avoid the possibility that the 23 million people are going to lose their health insurance, they're going to come up with a bill that looks remarkably like the Affordable Care Act. Maybe it's better funded, so some of these insurance companies can actually make some money. But it's going to the structure of the Affordable Care Act has to be there mathematically, logically. It's got to be there. You've got to. The only way you cover people with pre-existing conditions is you have healthy people that have to pay in, that are part of the insurance pool. You've got to actually have rich people pay taxes to support 80% of the people in the insurance pools who are poor and won't be able to afford it. So what are you going to do, Steve?
You're going to do
plan?
Medicaid for everybody, and that's Medicaid is the worst insurance system in the world.
Don't answer my question with something else.
We're going to allow people to buy insurance.
We're going to allow people to buy insurance across state lines. Steve Moore, what do you propose? What do you propose the Senate?
Allow people to buy insurance across state lines so you have multiple choices.
Yes, of course. We both agree with that. That is not going to change the insurance market. That's not going to bring 23 million people insurance. What are you going to do about 23 million people who are going to
We're going to allow people higher deductible plans. We're going to do medical malpractice reforms. There are a lot of things you can do to fix the healthcare system.
All right, we got to leave there.
It's going to look a lot like the Affordable Care Act.
Stephen Moore, thank you.
Can't blame the Obamacare collapse on Trump.
As well. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Mondays on TNT. Enter the provocative world of a young William Shakespeare in TNT's new drama series, Will.
We are at war, and our only weapons are words.
Told with a revolutionary visual style and modern soundtrack, the series celebrates all the love, lust, history, and brilliance of William Shakespeare. TNT's new series, Will, airs Mondays at 9, starting July 10th on TNT and on the TNT app.
Support for Anderson Cooper 360 comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. You're confident when it comes to your work and life. Rocket Mortgage gives you that same confidence when it comes to refinancing your existing mortgage or buying a home. It lets you understand all the details so you can be confident that you're getting the right mortgage for you. Go to rocketmortgage.com/AC360.
And good evening from Washington, where we are just now learning some of what the former director of the FBI told senators in a closed hearing this afternoon. We've got that breaking news and all the fallout from the open session in which James Comey called the President of the United States a liar. He also laid out the makings of a case, albeit a very hotly disputed one, for accusing him of a crime. His testimony today before the Senate Intelligence Committee did many things, including making it clear that the FBI was not investigating the president when Director Comey was running the Bureau. The White House is seizing on that item. However, his testimony also tells a story that some argue adds up to the president obstructing justice. Now, before going any further and hearing from legal experts who sharply differ on this question, it's worth laying down the law, as it were. It's drawn from Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1503, and at least two other related sections. The relevant language in condensed form reads, whoever corruptly endeavors to influence, intimidate, or impede the due administration of justice shall be punished. Keep that in mind as we go along tonight. And to that point, here are two portions from the hearing, both centered on the moment during Director Comey's Valentine's Day meeting in the Oval Office when he says the president asked him to drop the investigation of fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. First, Idaho Republican Senator James Jurish highlighting what he seems to see as Trump-friendly language in the Director Comey's account and Director Comey pushing back.
He did not direct you to let it go.
Not in his words, no.
He did not order you to let it go.
Again, those words are not an order.
No. He said, I hope. Now, like me, you probably did hundreds of cases, maybe thousands of cases, charging people with criminal offenses. And, of course, you have knowledge of the thousands of cases out there that where people have been charged. Do you know of any case where a person has been charged for obstruction of justice, or for that matter, any other criminal offense, where they said or thought they hoped for an outcome?
I don't know well enough to answer. And the reason I keep saying his words is I took it as a direction.
Right.
I mean, this is the President of the United States with me alone saying, I hope this. I took it as this is what he wants me to do.
We're going to hear more from Senator Risch shortly. Now here's Committee Vice Chairman, Democrat Mark Warner of Virginia, drawing attention to something he sees as potentially ominous.
You were in a meeting, and your direct superior, the Attorney General, was in that meeting as well, yet the President asked everyone to leave, including the Attorney General to leave, before he brought up the matter of General Flynn. What was your impression of that type of action? And have you ever seen anything like that before?
No. My impression was something big is about to happen. I need to remember every single word that is spoken. And again, I could be wrong. I'm 56 years old. I've been seen a few things. My sense was the Attorney General knew he shouldn't be leaving, which is why he was lingering. And I don't know Mr. Kushner well, but I think he picked up on the same thing. And so I knew something was about to happen that I needed to pay very close attention to.
We're going to be playing you all the key moments from the hearing over the next 2 hours tonight. But first, let's bring in CNN Chief National Security Correspondent Jim Sciutto, who's got the latest, starting with the breaking news from the closed classified session that Director Comey gave after the public one. What have you learned?
That's right. Myself and my colleagues Manu Raju and Evan Perez are learning that in the classified session this afternoon that Director Comey, or Fired Director Comey, told senators of a possible third undisclosed meeting between Attorney General Jeff Sessions and the Russian ambassador to the U.S., Sergei Kislyak. This based on intercepted Russian-to-Russian conversations discussing that meeting. I should note that CNN was the first to report this investigation last week, that Congress was looking into a possible third meeting. It relates to April 2016 at the Mayflower Hotel. And this helps explain a somewhat cryptic answer that Director Comey gave in the public session earlier today when asked about Attorney General Sessions. Have a listen.
Our judgment, as I recall, was that he was very close to and inevitably going to recuse himself for a variety of reasons. We also were aware of facts that I can't discuss in an open setting that would make his continued engagement in a Russia-related investigation problematic.
What problematic, apparently, was that he did not disclose yet again a meeting with Russia's ambassador to U.S. They're still investigating that, but they have some raw intelligence, these Russian-to-Russian intercepts, that indicate to them there may have been a third private meeting.
And in terms of the hearing today, I mean, former Director Comey forewent publicly reading his opening remarks. A lot of people assumed he would be reading them.
That's right. You know, those prepared remarks read somewhat like an affidavit. You know, it was very detailed. It was going through dates and names and times to document conversations with the president. His opening statement today, which was delivered off the cuff, although I'm sure he prepared for it, he seemed to speak more from his heart. And it didn't take him longer than 2.5 minutes before he first mentioned the word lie, accusing the president of lying, and he went on to use that very same word many times. Have a listen.
I knew that there might come a day when I would need a record of what had happened, not just to defend myself, but to defend the FBI and our integrity as an institution and the independence of our investigative function. I was honestly concerned that he might lie about the nature of our meeting, and so I thought it really important to document.
Important to document, and then he went on to give details that after that famous tweet, I hope there aren't tapes of this conversation, that he then felt the need to leak the contents of those memos through a friend of his, a professor at Columbia, to get it out into the public record. And then he again, as you mentioned before on the air earlier today, with the intention of having a special counsel being appointed, which is, of course, what happened.
Right, and now the private attorney for President Trump is saying, gave a press conference, just made a public statement saying that those were privileged communications.
Exactly, although we should note that the president referenced those communications himself in public statements prior.
Yeah. Well, more on that coming up. Jim, thanks very much. So far, the president has not done what he so often does. He's not tweeted about the day's hearings, which is frankly pretty remarkable because he often refers to himself as a counterpuncher, and being called a liar is quite a punch. However, his personal attorney, as we said, has responded. CNN Sarah Murray joins us now from the White House with that and more. Did the president have any response to Comey today?
Well, we saw a much more restrained President Trump. I mean, there were some rumors he might live tweet the testimony. He didn't do that. He did not respond to reporters who tried to ask him about the testimony later on in the day. He did make sort of a veiled hint to it when he was speaking at a conference in front of evangelicals, essentially saying we are all under siege and promising that he's going to keep hunker down and keep fighting. But I am told by Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, that the president didn't actually watch all that much of Comey's testimony today. He was in meetings for much of the morning and essentially went right from there to the speech. Did he see clips? Of course. Will he be watching tonight? I think that's a safe bet, but he wasn't exactly glued to the television watching it in real time earlier today, Anderson.
And as we said, the president's lawyer, Mark Kasowitz, backed up his statement from yesterday that the president feels totally vindicated. He also suggested that some parts of Comey's testimony were not true.
That's right. So on the one hand, he looked at Comey's testimony and said the president is vindicated. Comey said that the president was not under investigation when he was the FBI director. Trump's lawyer said that there was no indication that Trump tried to block any kind of investigation. But then he went on to hit Comey as a leaker. Listen.
Mr. Comey also admitted that there is no evidence that a single vote changed as a result of any Russian interference. Mr. Comey's testimony also makes clear that the president never sought to impede the investigation into attempted Russian interference in the 2016 election. Mr. Comey admitted that he leaked to friends of his purported memos of those privileged communications, one of which he testified was classified. Mr. Comey also testified that immediately after he was terminated, he authorized his friends to leak the contents of those memos to the press in order to, in Mr. Comey's words, quote, prompt the appointment of a special counsel, close quote.
So, Anderson, on the one hand, they're looking at Comey as a credible witness because he said the president was not under investigation at certain points. On the other hand, they're questioning his credibility. They took issue with a number of things Comey said in his testimony. They're denying, for instance, that Trump ever demanded loyalty from James Comey. And they're also denying that President Trump ever asked Comey to back off on this investigation into former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn.
As we said, one of the big pieces of news was Director Comey saying he thinks that the president and his team are liars. The White House was insisting the president is not a liar.
Well, certainly not a good day when you have to make that statement as a White House spokesperson, and that's what we saw Sarah Huckabee Sanders do today. She said the president is not a liar, that it's insulting to even bring that up. She had a pretty fierce statement on that front, but when she was asked about something else James Comey mentioned, the prospect of whether there is a recording system in this White House, whether there are tapes of his conversation with the president, she did not answer that. She said she has no idea if there's a taping system in the White House. You can bet, though, Anderson, that question is not going to be going away.
Yeah, although certainly she could find out the answer. Sarah Murray, thanks very much on that. We are fortunate to have three senators from the Intelligence Committee on the program tonight. Joining us right now is Senator Angus King, independent of Maine. Before we talk, though, I want to play the key moments from his questioning today.
With regard to the several of these conversations, in his interview with Lester Holt on NBC, the president said, I had dinner with him. He wanted to have dinner because he wanted to stay on. Is this an accurate statement?
No, sir.
Did you in any way initiate that dinner?
No. He called me at my desk at lunchtime and asked me, was I free for dinner that night? And called himself and said, can you come over for dinner tonight?
In that same interview, the president said, in one case I called him and in one case he called me. Is that an accurate statement?
No.
And in his press conference on May 18th, the president was asked whether he had urged you to shut down the investigation into Michael Flynn. The president responded, quote, no. Next question. Is that an accurate statement?
I don't believe it is.
In terms of his comments to you about, I think you were in response to Mr. Risch, Senator Risch, he said, I hope you will hold back on that. But when when a president of the United States in the Oval Office says something like "I hope" or "I suggest" or "would you," do you take that as a directive?
Yes. Yes, it rings in my ear as kind of, will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest?
I was just going to quote that in 1170, December 29, Henry II said, "Who will rid me of this meddlesome priest?" And then the next day he was killed. Thomas à Becket. That's exactly the same situation. We're thinking along the same lines.
And Senator Angus King joins us now. It was interesting to hear Director Comey and you both seizing on that line from Henry II.
And it wasn't rehearsed, I promise. It came to me as I was listening to Jim Rich's question about the power of the word of the sovereign, or in this case the president, in that kind of situation. And it was, and I had looked it up to get the date, and lo and behold, Jim Comey had arrived at the same conclusion.
So when Senator Rich focuses on the word hope, that the fact that it was the president saying, well, I hope you can do this, I hope, he was indicating, well, that's not a directive. That's not the president saying do this, just saying he hopes this.
Right.
Do you buy that? I mean, if somebody who's in a powerful position, looks you in the eye alone in the office and says, I hope you can do this.
This isn't somebody in a powerful position. This is the president of the United States in the Oval Office with you alone. And I think Mr. Comey's response was what would be almost all of us. And this is something the president wants done. And that's exactly what Henry II said when he said, will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest?
Does the intent matter? I mean, if the president was saying, even as a directive, look, drop this case, cut my friend some slack, is that different than if he directed Comey to drop the case as some sort of cover-up?
Well, it's hard. Intent is a very difficult matter. And by the way, this whole question of what did the president do and did it rise to the level of some kind of violation of law is really squarely in the lane of the special counsel. That's what they're going to be looking at. Our committee is a fact-finding committee, and it's part of our work, but it's not the whole deal. But I think one of the most significant things that came across today was this moment, and you played it with Mark Warner, where the president was in the Oval Office with a group of people, including Mr. Comey, including the Attorney General and Jared Kushner and others, and the president said, everybody out, including the Attorney General, closed the door alone with Mr. Comey.
No, he said it once, said it several times. Kushner lingered, and then Rice Priebus popped his head in also.
We want you out. And that tells me that the president knew that what he was going to be discussing had some extraordinary significance. Otherwise, it would have just been part of the meeting. And I think that makes it hard for the president to argue that, well, I didn't really intend it and it was just a casual conversation.
The other thing that Senator was making a point of was that Jim Comey should have done something either in that moment or gone to Congress or gone to somebody to warn, to raise red flags.
And I don't think that's an illegitimate point. And Comey conceded that. He said, in 2020 hindsight, perhaps I should have gone. He did go back and talk to the top echelons at the FBI about it. He did share that information with the leadership of the FBI. He didn't share it with the Attorney General because he was concerned about, I believe, where the Attorney General stood in all of this. But he did share it with the FBI. But yes, I mean, you can say in 2020 hindsight he should have perhaps resigned or gone to the Attorney General directly. He did spend a lot of time trying to get the Attorney General and others to form a barrier, to explain to the president this wasn't really appropriate to be meeting one-on-one with the head of the FBI.
How does this evolve beyond just a he said, he said? I mean, it seems like, President Trump had sort of teased the idea that there might be tapes. You now have the president's attorney coming out point blank and saying, look, the president never said this stuff. You would think his attorney wouldn't say that unless he knew that there were not tapes, which would, if they were revealed.
The easiest way to get out of that is if there are tapes to release them. Let's get that question clarified. Apparently the White House was equivocal on that, as they were several weeks ago. Let's find out if there were tapes, and if there were, let's have them. That'll end this discussion. Secondly is the question of Mr. Comey's credibility. He has a great deal of credibility, as we've heard in these hearings, and the contemporaneous memos that he wrote, which have probative value in a court. A contemporaneous memo goes to buttress the credibility of the witness, as well as having told other people about these conversations.
Senator, isn't there another way to test who's telling the truth here? which is to see if the president said similar things to other officials in the administration. What about
that was the point of my questions yesterday.
Exactly. I mean, just to introduce what you were saying, you had the Director of National Intelligence, Mr. Coates. You had the head of the NSA, both of whom refused to talk about their conversations on this very subject with President Trump. What would you like to know from them?
Well, I want to know whether they had similar conversations. There's been reported that there were similar conversations about their being asked by the president to somehow curtail or impede or influence the investigation, and that was the purpose of my questions. They didn't answer them. I think they had no good reason.
In fact, G.I. Coates acknowledged he had no real legal basis for not answering your question.
No legal basis. It was like, imagine you get home 3 a.m. and your dad says, "Where the heck have you been?" And you say, "Well, I find that an uncomfortable question. I don't think I'm going to answer it." I mean, that was essentially what happened yesterday. That's not going to wash. Now,
but what can you do about that? I mean, you're a senator. How can you get him to answer the question?
Director Coates left the door rather wide open by saying, "I will discuss this in a closed hearing and be more forthcoming." So we're going to make that happen. And so we will be able to ask those questions. And I think the point you're making is if they had similar conversations about the investigation, as Mr. Comey reported, that certainly goes to buttress his position. Now, it's important to also say, Comey was clear today that he felt that what the president was doing was strictly on the Flynn investigation, not on the entire Russian investigation. Then the question is, isn't Flynn a key part of the overall investigation? And as he alluded in his testimony in the open, if Flynn was guilty of something, a prosecutor might well use him as a witness based upon his unwillingness to go to jail to get evidence in the remaining kind of case. So you can't just read Flynn out of the case.
Senator, one of the mysteries that wasn't answered today is why the president was so energetic, apparently, in trying to get Comey to cut some slack for General Flynn. This isn't his habit. He's, that level, that degree of loyalty to people around him. Is there anything that you've learned either in the hearing today or in classified settings, I know you can't talk about specifics, that would help explain why the president might be so invested in this notion that Flynn get off?
Well, I don't think it's possible to answer that question, at least not at this stage. And again, we're now talking about a lot of issues that the special counsel is going to be following up. We've got all the indications are that the special counsel considers this whole question of the president's relationship to the investigation as part of his investigation. So we're going to find out about that. But in terms of what the motivation, it could be, and it was alluded to today, it could be just the president liked General Flynn and didn't want to see him hurt. I mean, it could be something as simple as that, or it could be an effort to try to impede the overall investigation. That's the question that I think the special counsel is going to have to ask.
Can I just ask you, I know you can't talk about what's in classified settings.
Yeah, but you're going to ask.
No, I'm going to try to work around it and see if you can answer it. You heard Jim Sciutto reporting that you were told that Jeff Sessions had an additional meeting with the Russian ambassador. That's what James Comey told you today. I know you can't confirm that, but broadly, even listening to the public testimony from James Comey today, how concerned are you about Jeff Sessions and his role currently as the Attorney General of the United States?
Well, I can't comment at all on whether there was a third meeting or any information around that. We already know that there were several meetings, and we know that Jeff Sessions recused himself. I do think there was a question that didn't really get followed up too much today, was the role that Jeff Sessions played in Comey's firing.
And that was what Comey was strongly hinting at in public testimony. So are you concerned that there was something that was inappropriate?
Well, we know from the public record. I mean, the president cited Jeff Sessions' recommendation in his letter firing Comey. So there's no question Jeff Sessions was involved in that decision.
Should he have been, knowing what you know?
My sense is if he recused himself, he should have recused himself and not had anything to do with that decision, depending upon what the real rationale for that decision was. And the president later said it was the Russia thing. Right. So the recusal had 20/20 vision in this case.
Again, without going, I'm sorry.
Comey
Go ahead, Gloria.
refused to say today, to characterize what he saw and what he observed with the president as obstruction.
Right.
He didn't. He was a fact witness.
And I think that was appropriate.
You think that? From what you heard from his testimony today, do you think there is a case that can be made against the president for obstruction?
Listen, that's not my job to make that call. That's all about the special counsel. That's a legal question, and I'm not in a position. You're asking me to be the judge, jury, and executioner here, and I'm not going to do it. I think there's a lot of information we still need. We need more information about what the president said to these other intelligence community members. But that ultimately, and I think it's important to make this distinction. Our committee is looking at the facts of what happened and trying to figure out how to prevent this from happening again. That's the important. To me, that was one of the biggest stories of today, not the back and forth with the president, but that Comey, I love the phrase he used. This question has no fuzz on it. It's absolutely clear what the Russians did, what they tried to do, and that they're going to come back and do it again. So that's the important question. So I'm going to leave to the special counsel and ultimately the legal system
but
whether
Congress
there was.
ultimately might have to decide.
Well, we might, but we're a long way from that.
Carl?
The question of collusion, Senator, the question of collusion by the campaign, without going into what classified information might be involved, are you confident that the committee is getting from the intelligence community and perhaps from witnesses the beginning of an account and being able to put together a sense of what happened in terms of possible collusion by the campaign?
Yes. We have unprecedented access to intelligence documents.
And you're getting it.
And we're getting it. It's at Langley. We go out to Langley, and that's where that was the compromise with the CIA and the NSA was the documents would stay there, so we go to the documents. But we have access to them, and we're getting full cooperation from the intelligence agencies at this point, and I expect that will continue.
And is that a robust, to use one of the terms of art, part of your investigation to the extent that you think it's producing a picture of what might have happened in a preliminary phase?
I would have to say it's quite preliminary. I mean, we're interviewing witnesses. Our staff is going to interview Jared Kushner next week. I think that was announced this evening.
That's going to be public, or
no? This is a preliminary interview by the staff.
Sebastian Gorka on your list?
I'm not going to answer who's specifically on our list, but let me just say that we're going to talk to a lot of the names you've heard and a lot of the names you haven't heard.
Professor Truly?
Are you concerned at all about the fact that the former director of the FBI acknowledged that he leaked these memos through a professor at Columbia? There's an argument to be made that those memos could be government property. He did it on a FBI computer. It was about stuff within his jurisdiction, within his duties as FBI director. And he leaked a major document after a president said, I really need your help dealing with leaks. I mean, does that concern you at all?
Well, number one, he wasn't in the FBI when this occurred. And number two, of course, it's a legitimate question, although when you use the word leak, it implies something is classified. And I heard the attorney say something about there was nothing classified about these memos. These were memos that he wrote to refresh his own recollection of an event. I think it's a fair question, but there's been no assertion of executive privilege by the presidency. We'll have to ask Jeff. But I don't know of why these documents, other than I think you stated it, government property, perhaps. But these were his personal recollections. They were in the FBI files. The important thing to me is we're going to get a hold of those memos.
What's interesting about the meeting in the Oval Office where Director Comey says the president said, I hope you can let Flynn go, and felt that this was a direction. There's a lot of Republicans who are in support of the president who are saying, well, Director Comey should have spoken up then. He should have, and putting the emphasis on Director Comey's actions as opposed to what the president himself said to Director Comey. Do you think that's appropriate, or should the focus be on the appropriateness or inappropriateness of the president of the United States?
Well, I think people are free to second-guess Comey's decisions, and as I said to you, perhaps he should have said, Mr. President, we shouldn't be having this discussion, or walked out, or
talked about resignation or gone to the Attorney General. I mean, there are a lot of things in 2020 hindsight we say he might have done. I think as he testified, he was sort of stunned by this. He did go back and talk to his colleagues at the FBI. He did record it in a contemporaneous memo. But to say, I mean, that doesn't change what the president said to him, at least that he alleges the president said to him. And, you can talk about what he should have done, but you can also talk about what the president should and shouldn't have done in that situation.
Given the fact that your committee is probing this issue of Russia's role, and as you say, you're leaving the rest to the special counsel, you heard Director Comey say that he had never been asked by the president about Russia and the role that it played, other than at that first meeting on January 6th with the intelligence community representatives. Do you think the president understands the gravity of this? Does he share your sense of gravity about what Russia was up to?
I thought that was one of the most disturbing moments of the hearing this morning, was when Joe Manchin said, did the president ever ask you any questions about this? Did he express any interest in it? Did he express any curiosity about what the Russians did? And the answer was no. He did qualify it a little bit, said on January 6th there was some discussion, but in the 8 subsequent conversations there was never a question about what were the Russians doing and how were they doing it. And, well, you all know it's no secret. For months the president has been essentially dismissing the whole matter as a hoax and a fake and a witch hunt and those kinds of things. That is disturbing, because this was an attack on our democracy. And what I think has to get across to the American people is Putin is not a Republican. He's an opportunist. He's not a Democrat. And this could just as easily be happening in 2 or 4 years in the opposite direction. Marco Rubio on our committee gets that very clearly, and he said it a number of times. He said, look, fellas, next time this could be us.
Do you know if there are tapes?
I do not. If you know about them, let me know.
Senator King, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
Much more ahead tonight, including the claim from the most powerful Republican in the House that the president deserves a pass because he's kind of new at all of this. Plus, why James Clapper, the former director of national intelligence, says the Watergate pales in comparison by what he is seeing today, and he comments on today's testimony by Director Comey. He believes that, and also saying that he believes President Trump is a threat to the entire American political system. Details on that ahead.
Support for Anderson Cooper 360 comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Chances are you're confident when it comes to your work, your hobbies, and your life. Rocket Mortgage gives you that same level of confidence when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. With Rocket Mortgage, you can apply simply and understand fully, so you can mortgage confidently. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/AC360. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states. NMLSconsumeraccess.org number 3030.
Well, to say that many in Washington certainly were riveted by James Comey's testimony is only a bit less obvious than saying Director Comey is just a little on the tall side. People here held watch parties at local bars. Every cable and broadcast network carried the hearings. You could hear it from one end of the radio dial to the other. And up on Capitol Hill, at least things pretty much came to a halt until the questioning ended. Then came the reaction. CNN's Phil Mattingly has that, joins us now. So I understand you have new information, Phil, about Jared Kushner meeting with the Senate Intelligence Committee. We just heard from Angus King. He's going to meet with the staff next week, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Jared Kushner will meet with Senate Intelligence Committee staff first. Then he will, according to 2 sources familiar with the matter, provide documents to the committee. And then after that, he is scheduled to meet with senators. Now, there's no expectation that any of this is going to be public, but this underscores what Jared Kushner's lawyer and White House officials have said repeatedly. He is willing to meet with anybody who's investigating anything and talk to them about his role. Now, what are they actually looking at? Well, Anderson CNN has reported that when it comes to Jared Kushner, the issues that they're looking at are related to a number of different issues, from the campaign's digital operation, his relationship with fired National Security Advisor Mike Flynn, and the efforts or reported efforts to set up a back channel with Russia. All of those things are of interest to investigators. The Senate Intelligence Committee looks like they'll get their chance to talk to him soon.
What's the reaction being on Capitol Hill today?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. That's actually the exact words of Senator John Cornyn, the second-ranked Republican in the Senate. Look, if you're a Democrat, at least according to Democratic senators I spoke to, this hearing was a vivid illustration of everything they've been saying occurred up to this point. Very damaging revelations, very severely problematic kind of disclosures, and even potential illegality. Now, if you talk to Republicans, there was some shrugging. John McCain told me that he didn't think there was anything earth-shattering or shocking out of this hearing. They're trying to move on. One thing I think is clear here, and you get this from the Kushner meeting with the Senate Intelligence Committee, that both the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Anderson, and the vice chairman, Mark Warner, the Democrat, making very clear, no matter what's going on, what the reaction is, their investigation continues. They are scheduled to meet with Bob Mueller, the special counsel, next week. They're obviously going to be meeting with Jared Kushner as well. Their investigation continues, even though this kind of Super Bowl of sorts for Washington is now over.
And what are you hearing from House leaders?
You know, what's really interesting today, the House officials were largely trying to keep their head down. They're passing a bill to largely dismantle Dodd-Frank, the financial regulation law from the Obama administration. But we did hear from Speaker Paul Ryan a defense that I heard today from a number of different Republicans. To put it plainly, the president didn't know any better. It's something I pushed back on in a follow-up question. Take a listen.
Of course, there needs to be a degree of independence between DOJ, FBI, and a White House, and a line of communications established. The president's new at this. He's new to government. And so he probably wasn't steeped in the long-running protocols that establish the relationships between DOJ, FBI, and White Houses. He's just new to this.
You said the president is new at this, not steeped in the long-running protocols. He has a staff. He has a White House counsel. Why is that an acceptable excuse for him?
I'm not saying it's an acceptable excuse. It's just my observation.
So there's nothing...
It's just my observation.
Should he correct me, or...?
He's new at government, and so therefore I think that he's learning as he goes.
And Anderson, this is something you heard from multiple Republicans today. Marco Rubio saying something similar, that it was up to the president's staff. They were the ones who failed here, that he didn't know any better. But it's not necessarily an excuse that flies. While he's new to this, while he's clearly not a politician, didn't have any government experience going to this, even Republicans will acknowledge that what they've seen, what came out of this hearing, what came out of Jim Comey's testimony was certainly untoward. The big question now is, does it go any further than that? So far, we don't have those answers.
Phil Mattingly, thanks. Few lawmakers watched the hearings with greater interest than our next guest, Congressman Adam Schiff of California, ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. Thanks for being with us. First of all, what do you make of that argument by Speaker Ryan that, well, the president is new to this, and it's maybe understandable that he doesn't understand the separations that are supposed to exist?
I don't buy that at all. I don't think you can make an argument that we hold this president to a different ethical standard unless he's suggesting that the president is new to high ethical standards or new to a commitment to be honest with the public about things. That just doesn't fly. And what's more, I found among the most powerful part of the testimony when the director said the president cleared the room, wanted the attorney general out, wanted everybody else out of the room. To me, as a former prosecutor, that says this is someone who is conscious that what he is about to do is wrong.
If you're new to it, you might just say it in front of everybody.
Well, yes. If you didn't think there was anything wrong with it, if you didn't think you needed to maintain any independence from the FBI, if you didn't think there was anything problem about asking the director to drop a case involving one of your close associates, then why clear the room?
To those who say, look, Director Comey should have spoken up, should have confronted the president immediately when the president said, well, I hope you can do this, or told other people, more others than those he told, or gone to somebody on Capitol Hill.
I agree. I think that Director Comey should have said, Mr. President, that's not an appropriate request. I can't do that. I'm not going to pledge loyalty for X, Y, and Z reasons. I'm not going to drop this case because you're asking me to. You shouldn't be asking me to. That is what he should have said. Now, whether any of us in those circumstances would have been any less stunned than him or would have acted in the way we would ideally want someone to act in that situation, I can't say. But I will say this. What I found credible about the director's testimony, among other things, is the fact he was willing to testify that he didn't meet some of the standards that we would want him to meet.
The fact that he admitted that he, in retrospect, should have done more.
Well, that he admitted that he acknowledged providing these documents to this professor in New York, that he said that he was persuaded by Loretta Lynch to use a word he didn't feel was the right word. So, I think that adds credibility when he's willing to say, okay, I should have handled this differently. Maybe I should have handled it differently.
If he should have spoken up to President Trump, do you agree that he should have spoken up to Attorney General Lynch at the time and saying, look, I'm going to use the word investigation, which is what this is, not matter?
Sure. I think you can certainly make the case that he should have had a different response to Loretta Lynch. He should have had a different response to the president. I think you can also make the case he should have gone to someone at Justice. If he couldn't go to Jeff Sessions, he should have gone to the acting deputy AG. But none of that mitigates the president's conduct. To me, it adds credibility to Comey's testimony. He wasn't a perfect FBI director. I've had my own questions about how he exercised judgment during the Clinton investigation. But the fact that he's willing to admit some of his own failings, to me, makes him more believable.
Was anything actually learned today? Anything decided? Anything really advanced?
A lot was learned today. And, of course, part of what maybe didn't seem so shocking to people is that we knew a lot of this beforehand because of newspaper stories. We knew, obviously, a lot yesterday because of the detailed written statement. But when you step back from it and you realize that the former director of the FBI has just said that he felt the need to write memos about his conversations because he felt the president would lie about them. The fact that the director of the FBI felt that he couldn't go to the attorney general because the attorney general was conflicted, that the president asked him to drop a criminal case against the national security advisor, that ought to take our breath away. And I really feel we can't get to the point where we lose our shock over this president's conduct. And I just don't accept in any way, shape, or form that you can dismiss it. Oh, he's not a politician. He knows right from wrong. And if he doesn't, he shouldn't be in that office. So I don't think that's an adequate answer.
Congressman Schiff, I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A lot to discuss with the panel. Kirsten, I haven't heard from you today. What today stands out?
Well, look, I think that if you take Director Comey, former Director Comey, at his word, it certainly painted a very bad picture of President Trump. The issue is, if you want to prove that President Trump is engaged in some sort of criminal activity, obstruction of justice, or high crimes and misdemeanors, then you're going to need something more than just one man's testimony. If you look back on other situations with Nixon, if there were no tapes, there would be no impeachment. With Clinton, if there was no blue dress, there would be no impeachment. It's not enough for one person to tell a story. So you either need, if Donald Trump did actually tape the conversations, to get those tapes, you need another person to come out and corroborate what he has said. Perhaps, another person saying, yes, Donald Trump told me that he said this to Comey and this was his intent. And that would be the second point, is we have to know what the president's intent was, because the fact of the matter is he's allowed to fire his director if he wants to. And the question is whether he was trying to obstruct justice, and that hasn't been proven. So I think that there was a lot of interesting information that certainly made a case in the direction of obstruction of justice, but we're a long ways away from proving any kind of criminal behavior.
Mary Catherine?
Yeah, sort of in the same place as Kirsten is. I think this was a mixed bag. Whichever side you're on and whichever narrative you want to embrace, you could pick things out. He called the president a liar, and he also called himself a coward. So everybody can enjoy their part of that. But the thing that people keep landing on, the idea that he needed to take notes because President Trump lied, or that President Trump might not know what these ethical lines are, I don't feel like that is new information. It is also not something that on its face gets you out of office. Like, we don't have a function for removing you from office because you lied sometimes. There has to be this other step. And I'm not sure that we got there today. We did get the news that perhaps he wasn't being investigated before, but maybe now in the Mueller part of this. And I think that's important. But I'm not sure we have hit that bar at this point.
David, all day, you've really been putting a lot of emphasis on the failure by Director Comey at the time to stand up to the president.
Right. And Anderson, I'll say it again. Everyone says that, Director Comey was a deer in the headlights at that point. He said in his testimony today, you heard him say, I was so taken aback by it, I didn't know what to do. But yet he went in another time and another time and another time. And I remind you that his May 2007 testimony about in the Bush administration, he was being driven home to have dinner with his family when he was told that the Attorney General and the White House Chief of Staff were going to see Attorney General Ashcroft, who was in the hospital. He thought very quickly, summoned his forces, ran quickly and laid on the tracks in front of Attorney General Ashcroft. So this is a gentleman who was very quick on his feet, thinks very fast and is used to standing up to power and speaking truth to power.
Van, what about that?
Look, standing up to Ashcroft when he's in his bed.
No, that's not the case. He stood in front of Andy Card and Alberto Gonzalez and defended. But
You've said this many times. Yeah. You've said this many times. Let me tell you why I don't think it's persuasive. In that situation, you have Ashcroft. You know, he's in a situation. You're doing the normal thing you would ordinarily do. Now, hold on a second. If you are somebody who believes in the rule of law, you're going to make a case, a passionate case for something you believe in. You are not facing the president of the United States, who may be committing a crime right in front of you, or who may just be a weirdo. So part of, I think, what you got to realize, I think, for ordinary people, you can try to talk your way around this stuff. If the best thing we can say about the president today is that he was only called the liar and we weren't able to prove he was a criminal today, that's not a good day for the president. And that's not why he came here.
If you were asked by the president...
But here's the thing. I've been somebody who's been fairly sympathetic to Comey. I think he was in a very bad position. He was put in a very bad position during the election. But I do think every time he talks, he looks worse. And it has been cast it's been cast the entire time as Boy Scout who has no motivations other than truth, justice, and the American way. That is a naive way to look at a guy who's been an operator in D.C. for many years.
And he orchestrated a special counsel.
I just think when you cast it as Boy Scout versus giant villain, which is how it has been cast, it matters that the guy is not quite that. In fact, he's leaking his own memos with political motivations to his friends and not standing up when he should.
We're talking about two people.
Right.
One of whom today is a stay-at-home dad in Northern Virginia, and the other is President of the United States. Yet, Jonathan, you want to talk about, like, whether Comey did right or did wrong. Who cares?
So now he's a stay-at-home dad. He's like, he's not a guy with any power whatsoever or awareness of what is going on.
Let me finish. If he leaked something, who cares? We're talking about the President of the United States in the Oval Office telling the FBI director to stop investigating his friends.
And the credibility of that FBI director matters a lot when he's the only guy telling the story.
It certainly does.
And he's not
Is anybody spoken with a specific criminal intent?
I'll give you exactly criminal intent. Why? Specific. Why do you
I'm sorry. Specific.
Let him answer.
Corrupt intent.
Yeah, corrupt.
Why?
Not criminal.
If you are just doing your job openly, with your top advisors, why do you tell the Vice President of the United States, the Attorney General, your son-in-law, and the Chief of Staff that they can't hear what you're telling Jim Comey? It's so secret.
You don't think that they knew what he was talking about? We'll find out. You're going to find out. Director Mueller will find out. I don't know. Director Mueller will find out.
I think part of the problem, this is the problem that Jeff and I have with each other, is that if you look at this from a criminal defense standpoint, you see plenty of possible defenses. In fact, looking at that hearing, I thought Comey created himself a serious problem. If he ever hits the stand as a witness, he's damaged goods. I mean, first of all, the leak does matter. The FBI website has very specific rules about how you can handle FBI documents. In my view, he violated all those rules. He may have even violated federal law.
So the argument that if it was his diary, his personal diary, would that be a problem too?
But that's how people are portraying this. This is some diary entry like it's a bad eHarmony date. And he went to this dinner. And
it does sound like it does sound like a pretty bad eHarmony date.
I expected couples, and it was just him, and it was very
awkward.
He
made me feel uncomfortable.
He made me feel uncomfortable. And you're like, really? What you're talking about?
I expected other people to be there.
Yeah, it was very uncomfortable. I'm going to swipe left. And, the problem with this is that those memos are written on an FBI computer about a very important meeting that went directly to an investigation as FBI director. He raised it with the other people in his office, which I, by the way, think was very redemptive today. I thought that that was a good point for him. But he also said that he believed there was evidence. Now, is this the standard he's going to apply to the rest of the FBI agents? That if you just write a memo to yourself, like a Field 302, by the way, which agents do all the time, that it becomes yours? I doubt it.
But the assistant director of the FBI for the criminal division, who we heard from earlier today, said that what Comey did was way out of the ordinary, and he should have taken himself out of the chain.
Can we pick and choose the credibility of James Comey? Can you say, he's credible when he acknowledges that the president, or that he told the president this 3 times, but we don't believe him on this other stuff? Van?
I was going to say the Democrats have. I mean, look, it's like, the Trump people are doing it now, and the Democrats did it as well. I mean, you said he behaved out of the ordinary. Yeah, this is what this guy does. He behaves out of the ordinary. He behaved horribly.
But the issue, the Hillary thing was different. The Hillary thing was different. Democrats remain enraged at Comey for disclosing the last-minute investigation about Anthony Weiner and the whole situation. But Democrats never said he lied. There was never an issue about his credibility. It was an issue about his political judgment.
Well,
but it's not. Wasn't
I have to disagree with that. Actually, I heard a lot of Democrats say a lot about his intent.
I agree with you that Comey has been built up, and now he turns out that he's a little bit more human. In some ways, to me, that makes him a little bit more credible. If he says bad stuff about himself, and he says, I'm not done. He says bad stuff about himself, and he says bad stuff about Trump. To me, it makes it more credible. But I think that we're missing a big deal here, which is out in the world, people are now asking a basic question. Where are the tapes? That is now in play in a way that it was not before. And the question has to be asked and answered, where are the tapes? Why would you have the President of the United States tease and talk about and threaten that there are tapes and we don't have them? And that's going to be the next big beat.
We got to take a quick break. We're going to have more up next. What Senator James Risch told me about his line of questioning toward Comey, asking about what he sees as a massive chasm between hoping and obstructing.
Do you know of any case where a person has been charged for obstruction of justice, or for that matter, any other criminal offense, where they said or thought they hoped for an outcome?
Hi, everyone. This is Michaela Pereira. I am hosting a brand new podcast called CNN's The Rewind 90s Edition. It starts on July 6th, and together we'll journey back to the era of VHS movie nights to discover how the 90s still leaves its mark on us today. Find out more at cnn.com/the90s.
A question for you. What is the real meaning of the word hope? A pretty philosophical question for a Senate Intelligence Committee to tackle, but that was the essence of one of the major exchanges from today's Comey testimony. We mentioned this at the beginning of the broadcast. Republican Senator James Risch was asking Comey about his statement that the president said he hoped Comey could let it go, referring to the Michael Flynn investigation. Here again is part of that exchange.
He did not direct you to let it go.
Not in his words, no.
He did not order you to let it go.
Again, those words are not an order.
Do you know of any case where a person has been charged for obstruction of justice, or for that matter, any other criminal offense, where they said or thought they hoped for an outcome?
I don't know well enough to answer. And the reason I keep saying his words is I took it as a direction.
Right.
I mean, this is the President of the United States with me alone saying, I hope this. I took it as this is what he wants me to do. Now, I didn't obey that, but that's the way I took it.
I spoke with Senator Risch shortly before airtime tonight. Senator Risch, that exchange when you pressed Director Comey on how he interpreted the president's comments in that February 14th Oval Office meeting, obviously words matter, intent matters. What do you make of the former FBI director saying that he took the president's comments about the Flynn case as a direction or a directive?
Well, Anderson, the good news about what Mr. Comey did is he wrote an excellent 7-page submission to the committee. And on page 5 of that, he wrote 28 words and put them in quotes as far as what his conversation was with the president on that very subject. So, and he said he did that contemporaneously with the conversation. So it's there. It's in black and white. Mr. Comey's a great lawyer. He understands words. All of us who go to law school and do the paper chase, we study words. And those words are very clear that the president hoped for an outcome of the investigation. Mr. Comey said he took that as something else. Look, we prosecutors are not shrinking violets. Mr. Comey's a tough guy. He's been around a long time. And if he didn't understand the president, he should have said, well, Mr. President, exactly what are you saying? And the president said one thing. He said he took it as something else. If they had a misunderstanding between them, so be it. But it seems to me that Mr. Comey should have cleared it up. And indeed, if he thought the president was directing him to get rid of the investigation, he had a whole suite of things he could have done. Whatever it is, you have the president, according to Mr. Comey, saying one thing And Mr. Comey taking it another way, hope is a whole lot different than directing him or even requesting him to make the investigation go away.
The president, through his attorney, denies that he ever asked Comey to let the Flynn case go. I mean, I guess for people who watch today, it's going to boil down to who they believe, James Comey or President Trump.
I don't think you have to do that. I think what you need to do is read the president's words. He uttered 28 words, according to Jim Comey, three sentences. Two of them began with "I hope," and that's a whole different thing than directing someone or commanding them or even requesting them. I'm stating that you hope something's a very different kettle of fish than directing them.
You've been tough on talking about people who have leaked information. The president's attorney blasted Director Comey for leaking a memo after he was fired through a friend to the New York Times about that Oval Office conversation. The president's attorney called the release of, he said they were privileged communications. Do you believe that the director's personal recollections of his meetings with the president are privileged communications?
You know, I haven't researched that. I don't think I would take that position on it. I wouldn't also call this a classic leak. It would have been nice if James Comey would have just stood up and said, look, media, here's my press release, and here are the notes I want to release. Going through the back door with this is just, it doesn't look good, but it isn't the classic leak. You got to give him kudos at least for standing up and saying, yeah, I did that in the hearing today.
It was interesting him acknowledging that he did that because he wanted a special prosecutor to be assigned, and he knew that by doing that would very well happen.
Well, and of course, that's the direction he chose to do. He could have done a lot of things to try to get a special prosecutor appointed. And look, James Comey's a good guy. This guy is a stand-up guy. He's been around a long time. He's an old-time prosecutor. He understands this stuff. And I think he did the American people a great service today. He did our committee a great service today by putting that 7 pages in crystal clear English language, easily readable as to what happened. And part of what's lost here, I think, on all this is just a small slice of what our committee is doing. The Intelligence Committee has been tasked with studying what the Russians did, how they did it, and reporting to the American people in detail those things. And we're going to get to the bottom of it, and we're going to do this for the American people and do it right.
Senator Risch, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.